behavior, and devotes a lot of their website to warning people about raw milk. They did a survey in 1995 about risky behaviors, and they found that 50% consumed uncooked eggs, 20% pink hamburger, 8% raw oysters, and only 1% consumed raw milk. So, but this is the one that they focused on. And another survey, they found all sorts of risky behaviors, including raw cookie dough. We know that that's a risky behavior now. And did not even report raw milk consumption. By the way, no pasteurization is required for all these other foods that they consider risky behaviors. Thanks. The FDA has a PowerPoint presentation warning against raw milk, and we did a point-by-point, very detailed analysis of this PowerPoint. They cited 15 studies that proved that raw milk was dangerous, and so we looked at each one of these studies. 80% of these studies did not have a positive milk sample. In other words, they didn't have a sample of milk showing the organism in the milk. 2/3 of them did not have statistical association, and almost half the findings were actually misrepresented by the FDA in their PowerPoint, and so forth and so on. And 100% did not show that pasteurization would have prevented the outbreak. Similarly, there was a report on 102 studies put together by the lawyer Bill Marler. We went through all of these studies, and once again, we found the same kind of numbers here. Most of these published reports are just junk science and heavily biased. So, the nitty-gritty question, what is the comparative safety of raw milk to pasteurized milk and other foods? It's a very difficult question to answer because we want to know this on a per serving basis, and we really don't know how many people drink raw milk. But we can always try. So here's one way of looking at it. The CDC attributes, during this period, almost 20,000 illnesses to the consumption of pasteurized milk. You don't hear that in press releases, do you? This is 10 times the number of illnesses attributed to raw milk during the same period. And since 93% of all of these attributed illnesses fail to have a valid statistical association or a positive test sample, this number is actually much, much lower. How much milk do people drink? The latest survey is 3.5% of households, which is kind of amazing, a large number. Anyway, Chris Masterjohn of the Weston A. Price Foundation worked all these numbers, and he came up to a number of 5.54 times as dangerous. In other words, you're 5.54 times more likely to contract illness on a per serving basis from pasteurized milk than from raw milk. Here's another way of looking at it. There are 60 government-reported illnesses from raw milk per year, and that's probably a highly exaggerated number. And there are at least 500,000 raw milk drinkers in the United States. So the rate of illness from raw milk can be calculated at 0.12%. The actual percentage is probably much lower. According to the government, there's 76 million cases of foodborne illness from all sources per year in a population of 300 million, so the rate of illness from all foods is 25%. Thus, even using inflated government statistics on illness from raw milk, you are over 2,000 times more likely to contract illness from other foods than you are from raw milk. Plus, drinking raw milk protects you against illness from all these other foods. Compared to 30 to 50 years ago, we know how to keep raw milk clean. We have the technology to get clean raw milk to every community in the United States. We understand about managed rotational grazing, how that cuts down on pathogens in the manure and in the cows. We understand that and know how to use effective testing. We understand about waterborne pathogens. We know how to keep them out of the bulk tank. We know about cleaning systems. We know about refrigeration, bulk tanks and transportation, and we have easier and much less expensive testing techniques. So we have this technology. Actually, the technology of pasteurization is the technology of the 1950s. The technology that we're using for raw milk today is the technology of the 21st century. Okay, we showed these slides last night, but just to recap, we did have a problem in the 1800s that was blamed on raw milk, a 50% death rate among children living in the inner cities. The milk they were drinking came from the so-called swill dairies next to the breweries. These were unimaginably filthy, and the cows were eating the swill from the confinement dairies. And water, which of course was also filthy, was often added to the milk to make it go further. They put chalk in the milk to make it look white. Next. And the mandatory pasteurization was first proposed by Adam Jacobi. He was the founder of the American Academy of Pediatrics. He left Berlin for New York after being jailed for 2 years for high treason. And he was a socialist who corresponded with Karl Marx. I don't know if that's germane to our argument or not, but I think it's interesting. Anyway, he worked very hard to convince the public that to make milk safe, you needed to heat it till bubbles appeared. The biggest promoter of pasteurization was his close friend and fellow German emigre Nathan Strauss, the owner of Macy's. He invented the phrase, "raw milk can kill." And Strauss opened the Strauss Pasteurization Milk Laboratory and introduced low-cost milk depots in New York. Nevertheless, raw milk and pasteurized milk coexisted for 50 years. The so-called certified raw milk, which came online about 1860, which was milk from cows tested free of disease and milked in clean conditions. And the early arguments for pasteurization always recognized that certified raw milk was just as safe as pasteurized milk. And then the big push for pasteurization started in 1945 with the publication of an article in Coronet magazine, a seemingly factual article called "Raw Milk Can Kill You," about a town called Crossroads, USA, where many died from undulant fever contracted from raw milk. The only problem is that Crossroads, USA did not exist. This outbreak never happened. The whole thing was made up. By the way, look at the beautiful girl on the cover. Almost certainly grew up on a farm drinking raw milk. Okay. And that was followed a year later by an article in the Reader's Digest, which repeated the false story about Crossroads, USA. Next. And 1948, oh, I've got a few more slides to show you. In 1948, that's when the first mandatory pasteurization laws were passed. But meanwhile, the milk problem had been solved. The death rates had gone way down by 1945. This was just not a problem. The swill dairies were outlawed. We had improved hygiene. Most importantly, the horse got out of the city. Cars came in. You didn't have contaminated water. We had the certified raw milk movement. They ensured the milk was clean, and of course, refrigeration. This is what solved the milk problem. It was not pasteurization. Okay, this is a very interesting chart showing the decline in deaths from various diseases: diphtheria, whooping cough, let's see, measles, scarlet fever, typhoid, whooping cough, diphtheria. Way down. And that's when mandatory pasteurization came in, 1948. Next. We found a very interesting study that looked at the decline of Chicago mortality rates 1850 to 1825, and he looked at 3 factors. First of all were milk laws. And that in itself is interesting. There was a milk law passed in 1983 that began inspections to see whether the milk was of high quality. By high quality, they meant they had plenty of fat in it. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? How times have changed. Then in 1908, they passed a law that milk must be pasteurized or certified pathogen-free. This was not mandatory pasteurization. It was just that if it was raw and had pathogens in it, then it had to be pasteurized. The diphtheria antitoxin was introduced in 1985, but the author concluded that the main factor was improved water sanitation. But up to 1983, all the water that they drank was drawn from the shoreline of Lake Michigan, where all the sewage was dumped in.